I came home early after getting accepted to a prestigious mentorship and overheard my girlfriend telling her ex, "He's so gullible and easy. I'm just using him for stability until you're ready." 2 weeks later, she was begging outside my apartment in the rain. I don't know why I expected things to be different. Maybe it was the long hours at the office, the emails piling up with deadlines, the constant hum of the city outside my window. It was all so predictable, a routine I had come to accept. But then something happened that threw all of that off balance. I was leaving work early for the first time in weeks. I'd just received news that I'd been selected for a mentorship program abroad, a prestigious opportunity, one Lena and I had talked about in passing, but had quietly let go of over the last few months. I'd thought it was one of those dreams that fizzled out in the wake of life's distractions. But it hadn't. And suddenly, there it was, the very thing that had once seemed so out of reach. I couldn't wait to tell Lena. So, I did what I always do when I get excited about something. Head home to share it. I thought about calling her on the way, but I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted to see the look on her face when I told her. Maybe we'd even go out to dinner, something special to mark the beginning of this new chapter. I drove the familiar route, my car humming along the road. As I turned onto the gravel path leading to our cottage, I couldn't help but feel a flutter in my chest. I pictured her there, waiting for me, maybe getting ready for dinner. The moment I stepped in the door, I imagined I'd tell her about the opportunity, and we'd talk about how this could change everything for us. But then I saw her. She was in the living room, laughing. I paused for a moment on the gravel path, peering through the hedges, trying to understand what was happening. The sound of her laughter reached me, light and airy, only it wasn't for me. She was on a video call, the phone positioned just right to show off her wide smile. But it wasn't me she was talking to. It was Carter, her ex, the name I'd never spoken, but the one that had lingered in our conversations all those months ago. He was toxic, she said, a mistake from her past, the man she'd moved on from, the man she never wanted in her life again. But there they were, laughing like old friends, like things were fine. I stood there for a moment, the cool breeze on my face doing little to calm the confusion bubbling inside me. I should have walked in. I should have confronted her. But I didn't. I stayed hidden, watching from the shadows, too paralyzed to move. Then, something in their conversation caught my ear. "You know he's naive, right? Always so sure of himself, so easy to manage." Lena's voice was playful, but there was something about the way she said it that made my stomach churn. "And his promotion? Don't make me laugh. He's going to be so upset when he finds out it was all for nothing." My heart dropped. Trust, the foundation I'd built our relationship on, felt like it was crumbling in my chest. I hadn't wanted to believe it, but now, with the laughter ringing in my ears, I realized that my instincts had been right all along. Lena had lied to me. She'd been deceiving me for months, maybe longer. I wanted to walk in, to say something, to demand the truth. But I couldn't. I couldn't bear to face her, not yet. Not like this. So, I stayed in the shadows, watching them. And in that moment, everything changed. The trust one thought we had was a lie. I hadn't known it yet, but this was the moment I'd start pulling away. I couldn't get her laughter out of my head. It echoed in my ears long after I'd left the cottage, long after I'd driven aimlessly down empty streets, trying to outrun the realization that had settled into my gut like a stone. I should have walked in. I should have confronted her. But I hadn't. And now I had to know more. I couldn't just let it sit there, unanswered, festering. I needed to understand exactly what was happening, what Lena had been hiding from me. And I wasn't about to let her know I was on to her. Not yet. The next evening, I found myself standing outside the cottage again. This time, I wasn't peering through the hedges, but I was close enough to hear everything. The kitchen window was cracked open just a bit, letting the sounds of their conversation drift out to where I stood. I told myself I'd only listen for a minute, just to see if I could hear more, just to know if I was imagining things or if this was something real. But the minute I heard her voice, I knew this wasn't just my imagination. "So, how much longer before he gets his inheritance?" Lena asked, her tone light, almost casual. I froze. "Not long. He doesn't know it yet, but his promotion is a joke. He thinks it's a step up, but it's really just a way for him to feel like he's moving forward. When I get that money, we'll be good. He's so easy to manage," Carter's voice responded, laughing lowly. My blood ran cold. The words sank into my skin, each one a sharp jab. I'd been right. All this time, my instincts had been right. Lena wasn't just pretending to care about me. She was using me. She was waiting for me to fall into the trap, waiting for me to give her everything. And Carter, of course, had been in on it the whole time. Has he noticed anything? Any red flags? Carter asked. No, Lena replied with a soft chuckle. He's too wrapped up in the idea of our life together to question anything. He trusts me. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense at first. How could she say that? How could she lie to me like that, in such a cold, detached way? Had all of it been fake? The things she said, the way she looked at me when we were together, was it all just part of the act? Good. Keep it that way, Carter said, his voice growing more serious. You know what's at stake, Lena. If you screw this up, it's not just the inheritance you lose. It's everything. I didn't know how to respond to that. My chest felt tight, like someone had placed a hand there and was slowly squeezing. I wasn't sure if I was going to choke on my anger or my hurt first. But I couldn't move. I couldn't pull myself away from that window, from that moment, even as the knowledge hit me like a wave crashing over the shore. Lena had been playing me, and I'd been too blind to see it. She wasn't just someone I trusted. She was someone who had been using me as a pawn in her game with Carter. All this time, I'd been the one fooling myself into thinking we had something real, something unbreakable. You're doing the right thing, Lena, Carter said. Once he's out of the picture, it'll all be easier. He doesn't need to know anything. Just let him believe everything's fine. He'll never know what hit him. I couldn't hear any more. My hands were shaking now, my stomach twisted in knots. I turned away from the window, leaving before they could catch me listening. But as I walked, the world felt like it was unraveling around me, piece by piece. The house, the life we'd built, it wasn't real. None of it had been real. I felt a deep, painful sigh escape from my chest, the weight of the truth hitting me. All this time, I'd been giving, thinking it was love. But it wasn't love. It had never been love. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't just stand by and let this happen. But I also knew that confronting her now wouldn't do me any good. I had to be smarter than that. I needed to play my cards carefully. So I chose silence. I didn't call. I didn't ask her any questions. I didn't confront her like I wanted to. Instead, I started planning. I would gather my proof, gather everything I needed to expose her for what she was. But I wouldn't do it until I had it all. Until I was ready. And then, when the time came, I'd make her see exactly who I was. And maybe, just maybe, I'd walk away without looking back. I spent the next 2 days in a kind of detached haze. I could barely focus at work, and when I wasn't there, I was holed up at home, watching Lena like I was a stranger in my own life. I didn't trust anything anymore. Not the little things she'd say to me, not the way she'd smile, not even the way she'd touch my arm when she walked by. Every gesture felt like part of a play, and I was starting to see the cracks in her performance. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. More proof. I needed to know exactly how deep this went, how long she'd been doing this to me. The plan formed quickly. The first thing I did was take a hard look at our finances. The shared accounts, the business investments, everything I thought I understood about where our money was going. It was all a blur. So I started digging. I had access to the bank records, and though I wasn't exactly an accountant, I knew how to read the numbers. What I found was staggering. Lena had been moving money from our joint business account into a personal account she'd kept hidden from me. At first, I thought it might have been an error or something I missed. But then, I found the transactions. Small, at first, just a few $100s here and there. But the deeper I went, the larger the amounts got. Thousands. Tens of thousands. I felt a sharp spike in my chest. What the hell was she doing with all this money? And where was it going? I needed to know more, so I pulled up her email account. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, just a way to confirm what I already suspected. But when I saw the emails from Carter, everything clicked into place. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was investing it all in Carter's new photography studio, a business that wasn't even close to being legitimate. I felt sick to my stomach. I went through every last email. There were mentions of future loans and paybacks, but it was all carefully worded, as if to cover her tracks. She was funneling money into his venture, and all the while, she had me believing we were fine, that everything was on track. I couldn't believe it. All these months, I'd been working late nights, taking on extra projects, thinking I was securing our future. And what was Lena doing? Using me. Manipulating me. I sat there for hours, scrolling through her messages, my hands trembling. I should have felt anger, but instead, I felt empty, betrayed. And then came the hardest part. I started moving money. Small amounts at first. Nothing too noticeable, just enough to shift things in my favor. I opened a new account, moved our savings there, changed the passwords to everything I could think of, our shared accounts, the business accounts, the email account she had access to. I even contacted my lawyer, making sure everything I was doing would hold up if it came down to something more official. I didn't know what the end game would be yet, but I knew I was laying the groundwork. I had to get out, but I had to do it carefully. She couldn't know yet. Not until I had everything in place. By the time Lena came home that night, I was already acting normal again. That was the hardest part, pretending like nothing had changed. She walked through the door, her smile as bright as ever. But I knew better now. "How was your day?" she asked, dropping her purse on the table. "Busy," I replied. "The usual." I kept my gaze steady, trying not to give anything away. She didn't know it yet, but I wasn't the same person she'd left that morning. I wasn't the guy who trusted her anymore. I wasn't the guy who was willing to turn a blind eye. For the first time, I was seeing things for what they were. And I was done. Lena poured herself a glass of wine and sat down next to me on the couch, her leg brushing mine in a way that used to feel familiar. But now, it felt like a stranger's touch. "Do you think things will change with your promotion?" she asked casually, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I took a long, slow breath. "Yeah," I said a little too quickly. "I think they will." She smiled and kissed my cheek, a light gesture that felt so off now, so hollow. I didn't kiss her back. I didn't feel anything anymore. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. She was light, carefree, as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just uncovered her deception. But I knew, and I would make sure she knew I knew. I let her sleep that night, pretending like everything was fine. But as I lay there next to her, I realized this was the beginning. I had everything I needed now. The proof, the plan. I just had to make my move. And when I did, it would be her that was left in the dark. The night Lena slept soundly beside me felt like the longest night of my life. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything I'd uncovered. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how deeply I had been played, how much I'd been blinded by love, or what I thought was love. It had been a week since I'd started moving the money, since I'd put all the pieces into motion. I had everything set up now, new bank accounts, passwords changed, assets secured. It was just a matter of time before I exposed her, before I cut her out of my life for good. But even as I sat there, planning the next step, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to happen. Walking away from Lena wouldn't just be walking away from her. It would be walking away from the life I thought we had built, from everything we had built together. The next day, Lena and I had breakfast like any other morning. She sat across from me, flipping through her phone, texting someone while I sipped my coffee. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The image of her with Carter, the coldness in her voice when she spoke about me, it was all still fresh in my mind. But I had to play it cool. I couldn't let her know that I knew. "Are you still thinking about going abroad?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Yeah," I replied, my voice steady. "It's a great opportunity. I'm excited." She finally looked up, a smile on her face. "I'm glad. You deserve it, Caleb. It'll be good for us, don't you think?" Us. The word struck me like a punch. Us. The image of us had always been something I clung to, something I convinced myself was real. But now, I realized how hollow it sounded. It wasn't us. It was just her, using me, manipulating me. And I had let it happen. "Yeah," I muttered, forcing a smile. "It'll be good for us." We finished breakfast in silence, and I watched her gather her things to leave for the day. She was in a rush, as usual, always in a rush, always evasive, always too busy for me. But today, I wasn't going to follow her. I wasn't going to sit in the background of her life, pretending everything was okay. I was done being the one who was always there, always supporting, always sacrificing. I waited until she was out of the door, her car pulling out of the driveway before I stood up. It was time. Time to put the final part of my plan into motion. I had spent hours the night before, setting up the final pieces, everything I would need to gather the evidence I needed to make my move. I had recorded their conversation when I overheard them, Lena and Carter, mocking me, laughing about how easy I was to manipulate. I had every email, every bank transaction, every message. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy the illusion. I was going to make her see exactly who she was. The hardest part wasn't going to be exposing her. The hardest part was going to be staying calm while I did it. I couldn't afford to make a scene. I couldn't afford to let her see how much I had been hurt. That evening, I prepared for the confrontation. I had arranged for us to go to a nice dinner, a place we'd been to once before. A place that felt special, where we had talked about our future together, where we had made plans. She would think it was just another romantic night out, but I knew exactly what I was going to do. The table was set, the candles flickering, and Lena looked as beautiful as ever when she arrived. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and settled into her chair like everything was fine. I smiled at her, my stomach twisted with nerves. This was it. This was the moment when I would finally confront her. I waited until she had taken a sip of her wine before I started. "Lena," I said, my voice steady but low, "there's something I need to show you." Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. "What is it?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers, emails, bank statements, photos, the entire conversation I'd recorded. "Everything. This is everything," I said, pushing the papers toward her. "Everything I've found. Everything you've been hiding from me." She stared at the papers in shock, her face pale as she scanned the first few lines. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she began flipping through the pages, each one exposing more of her betrayal. Her hands trembled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I could feel my pulse quickening, my anger building, but I kept my tone calm. "How long, Lena?" I asked. "How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been using me?" I didn't mean for you to find out," she started, her voice shaky. "No," I interrupted, my eyes locking onto hers. "You didn't mean for me to find out. But here we are." I pulled out my phone and played the audio of her conversation with Carter. The laughter, the mockery, the plans they'd made. It filled the air between us, and I watched her face as she listened to the sound of her own betrayal. "This isn't about a mistake, Lena," I said, my voice cold now. "This is about strategy. You've been planning this. You've been taking from me, using me, and I've been too blind to see it. But now, I see everything." She sat there, speechless, her mouth moving but no words coming out. Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy. I felt nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. "Lena, I want you to leave," I said, my voice steady. "This isn't working anymore. This life we've been building, it was a lie, and I can't keep living in it." She opened her mouth, but I didn't give her the chance to speak. "I'll have everything legally taken care of. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Your things are being moved out. I want you gone." She stood up, the tears streaming down her face now. "Caleb, please. Please don't do this. I'm sorry. I love you." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You never loved me. You loved what I could give you. And that's over." I stood up and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her behind, speechless and broken. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white, but I didn't feel the tension. I just felt numb. I had done it. I'd said the words, laid it all out in front of her. But as I sat there, staring at the road, I couldn't escape the weight of what had just happened. It wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the end of the life I'd thought I had. The life I'd worked so damn hard for. When I got home, everything felt different. The house was still the same, familiar and comforting, but now it felt hollow. I'd walked out of the restaurant tonight thinking that everything would change from here on out, but when I stepped through the door, I was hit with a sinking feeling. I was alone, truly alone. I hadn't realized just how much of my identity had been tied to Lena, to us. And now that it was gone, I didn't know where to start picking up the pieces. I could feel the space she left behind, like an empty room I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I walked over to the kitchen counter and grabbed the papers I had carefully prepared earlier, the legal documents, the papers to dissolve our joint accounts, the eviction notice I had already signed, and the ones that gave me sole control of the business. The paperwork didn't make me feel powerful, though. It just felt cold. Necessary, yes, but cold. The words on the page didn't ease the ache in my chest. I thought that once I had everything set up, once I had the legal protections in place, it would feel like victory. But victory wasn't what I felt. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just tired. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind running 100 miles a minute. I had already scheduled a meeting with my lawyer. I had to make sure everything was in motion legally, that nothing would slip through the cracks, that she wouldn't be able to retaliate or use anything against me. I couldn't let her. Not after everything she'd done. The phone buzzed next to me on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen, already knowing who it would be. Lena. I stared at the text, hesitating. The words felt like a cruel mockery. I'm so sorry for everything, Caleb. Please, we can fix this. I know I've made mistakes, but we can make it work. Please talk to me. I stared at it for a long time, my heart thudding in my chest. I'd wanted answers from her. I'd wanted the truth, and now here it was, presented in front of me, raw and desperate. She was trying to salvage what she could, trying to claw her way back into my life with empty words and promises she never intended to keep. But I was done. I couldn't keep fighting for someone who had never truly fought for me. I didn't reply. Instead, I picked up my phone again and made another call, the one I'd been putting off. The lawyer. Caleb, he said, his voice steady but kind. You're sure about this? Yes, I replied, my voice firm. I'm sure. We went over the next steps, finalizing the paperwork, securing the house, and ensuring Lena's removal from the business. I listened to him outline everything with a detached focus, my thoughts drifting, only half engaged. I was already mentally moving forward, but something lingered in the back of my mind. I'd been careful to stay emotionally distant during the call, but as I hung up, I felt a pang of guilt. For a brief second, I wondered if I had made the right choice. Was this really the best thing for me? For us? But then, I remembered the way I felt when I'd found the truth. The disbelief. The shock. The way it crushed me when I realized that everything I thought I knew was a lie. It had been a long time coming, but I had finally seen her for who she really was. And no matter how many apologies or empty promises she tried to throw my way, it couldn't erase the truth. I wasn't going to waste any more time on what wasn't real. I grabbed the eviction notice, walked out to the mailbox, and dropped it in. A small step, but one that felt like the first real action I'd taken in weeks. The afternoon came, and I was sitting in the office of my lawyer when the call came again. It was Lena. I can't do this anymore, Caleb. Her voice was low, shaky. You're going to regret this. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the business. I just want us back. Her words fell flat. They sounded rehearsed, as though she had already said them 1,000 times to herself, trying to convince herself she could fix this. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. I'm done, Lena, I said, my voice calm but resolute. There's nothing left to fix. She didn't say anything after that. Just a long silence before the line clicked off. And with that, it was over. I stood up from my desk, the weight of what I had done settling in, but there was no sense of relief. No great sense of closure. Only a numbness that followed me as I walked back to the car. The finality of it all was suffocating, and as I drove back home, I realized that the real work was just beginning. The end of this chapter wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the beginning of something new. Something I had to do on my own. For the first time in a long time, I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I spent the next few days in a haze of activity. The paperwork, the phone calls, the meetings with the lawyer, it was all overwhelming, but it kept my mind occupied. There was no time for reflection, no time to feel the weight of what I'd done. I just kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other. It was easier that way. Easier than sitting still and letting myself think about how empty everything felt. I had already made arrangements for Lena's things to be packed up and sent to her mother's house. She didn't know it yet, of course. I didn't want to give her a chance to beg, to apologize again. I couldn't let her manipulate me anymore. Not after everything she'd done. I hadn't heard from her since our last phone call. It wasn't surprising. She had to know I meant it. But still, part of me kept waiting for her to show up at the door, to knock and say the words I'd been waiting to hear. I'm sorry. I'll change. We can fix this. But I wasn't going to give her that chance. I hadn't told anyone about what had happened. Not my sister, not my friends. There was no one to tell, really. At least no one who would understand. They would all say the same thing. Give her another chance. She didn't mean it. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't the person who let others walk all over me, who allowed myself to be used just to avoid conflict. The only thing I was focused on now was getting my life back. Reclaiming my independence, my peace of mind. I was tired of being part of someone else's story. I needed to start writing my own. It was late one evening when the unexpected knock came. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through an old journal I had found in one of the boxes I'd packed away during our last spring cleaning session, When I heard it, 3 quick, sharp raps against the door, I felt my stomach twist. I didn't even have to check who it was. I already knew. I stood up, hesitated, and then walked over to the door, opening it just a crack. There she was, standing on the doorstep, her eyes red and puffy, her shoulders slumped as though the weight of the world had been placed on them. "Lena," I said quietly, my voice even, despite the chaos of emotions stirring inside me. She started, then stopped herself, trying to steady her breath. "I need to talk to you." I didn't say anything at first. I didn't let her in. I just stood there, waiting. "I'm sorry, Caleb. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what I was doing." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the words spilling out in a desperate rush. "I made a mistake. I never meant for it to go this far, but now I don't know what to do." I couldn't look at her. I couldn't listen to the same empty words, the same hollow apologies. She had every chance to stop this. Every chance to be honest with me, to stop using me for her own gain. "You've made your choice," I said, my voice calm. But there was a finality to it now. "There's nothing left to fix." Her face crumpled, the tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She reached out, her hand hovering just an inch away from my chest. "Please, Caleb," she whispered. "Please, don't do this. Don't let everything fall apart." I couldn't let myself be swayed. Not now. I stepped back, closing the door just a little more between us. "You did this, Lena. You made it fall apart. And I'm not going to keep pretending it didn't happen." She opened her mouth to speak again, but I stopped her. "No," I said firmly. "I'm done. You don't get to do this to me anymore. I don't care what you say. I don't care if you're sorry. It's too late." I stepped back from the door, finally closing it completely, locking it with a quiet click. I stood in the silence that followed, the weight of her presence still hanging in the air. I could feel the tension in my chest, but it wasn't the kind of tension I'd felt before. It wasn't the knot of hurt or anger that had been twisting inside me since I found out the truth. This was different. It was the kind of tension that comes when you've finally put your foot down, when you've finally chosen yourself over someone who never saw you for who you were. I walked to the kitchen, ran my hands under cold water. The movement felt mechanical, like I was going through the motions of living, even though something inside me felt frozen. But at least I knew I was doing the right thing. At least I knew I was finally putting myself first. The next few days passed in a blur. Lena didn't call again, didn't show up at my door. I knew she'd been trying to reach out to me, but I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had to stay strong, had to keep moving forward. I couldn't afford to slip back into the pattern of forgiving her every time she begged for another chance. I had to remind myself every day that this was the only way out, the only way to move on. And then, one afternoon, I received a package at the door. It wasn't from Lena. She'd stopped trying to contact me by then. But when I saw who it was from, I couldn't help but feel my heart rate spike. It was from the lawyer. I opened it cautiously, my hand steady but my pulse quickening. Inside, there was a thick envelope. Legal documents. My name on the top. It was official. I had done it. I was free. The days after receiving the legal documents felt oddly anticlimactic. It was official now. Everything had been finalized. I had closed that chapter, but even now, as I walked around the house, I couldn't escape the void she'd left behind. It wasn't the house itself that felt different. It was me. I was the one who had changed. The place that once felt like home now felt hollow. The silence in the house was deafening, the kind of silence that presses in on you, not with peace, but with the weight of what's been lost. It was the silence of someone being forced to move forward even though they weren't ready. It was the kind of silence I had been avoiding for so long. But I wasn't going to let myself slip back into the person I was before, always apologizing, always bending for the people who never appreciated me. No more. I had to keep moving forward, even if that meant doing it alone. I hadn't heard from Lena since that night at the restaurant. She tried to call, but I ignored every message. I couldn't bear to hear the same pleading, the same empty promises. I'd heard it all before, and I was done. I spent the next few days reorienting myself, focusing on the small victories that had been buried under all the noise of the last few months. I cleaned up the office, rearranged some of the furniture, and even started looking into the mentorship program I had been accepted into. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was doing something for myself. But even with all the progress, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was a Thursday when I received the message. It wasn't from Lena. It wasn't from anyone I expected. In fact, it was from Carter. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it, my fingers trembling slightly. I'd never heard from him directly before, only through the subtle references Lena would make. But now here he was, sliding into my life with a single, cold message. Carter, I know what you're doing, Caleb. You don't want to do this. Trust me. I sat there, frozen for a moment. The message was simple, but there was something about it that felt like a threat, even though it wasn't explicit. There was no, "Don't make me come after you," or anything like that. It was just a warning. I was tempted to block him right there and let it go, but I didn't. Something in me wanted to know what he wanted, what he thought he could achieve by reaching out to me. I wasn't going to let this idiot manipulate me, not after everything that had already happened. I typed a reply, my fingers moving quickly, almost before I could stop myself. Me. Stay out of my life, Carter. You don't know what you're dealing with. I waited for his response. Seconds stretched into minutes, then into hours. But there was nothing. It was the kind of silence I was getting used to. But this time, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a prelude to something bigger, something I couldn't avoid anymore. The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. Caleb, I need you to come in, he said, his voice sounding unusually grave. There's something we need to discuss about the legal paperwork you submitted. My heart dropped. I knew, in that moment, that it wasn't about anything simple. This wasn't just about transferring assets or closing accounts. Something had changed. I went to the office, the uncertainty growing in my chest. As soon as I sat down, my lawyer handed me a stack of papers, a thick stack that felt heavier than it looked. What's this? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. He pointed to a particular sheet. It's a legal challenge, Caleb. Lena's contesting the paperwork. She's hired a lawyer to fight you. I felt my stomach drop. I had expected this, in some way. But hearing it, seeing it laid out in front of me, made the weight of it real. Why? She agreed to everything. We signed the documents. She claims that you misled her, that you manipulated her into signing the paperwork while she was under duress. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's ridiculous. She knew exactly what she was doing. She's also claiming emotional distress. The whole thing is pretty flimsy, but her lawyer is taking it seriously. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples. What does this mean for me? Right now, it's just a delay. We'll need to go to court. But we can fight this, Caleb. You have everything on your side. The evidence, the documentation. She has nothing. She's just trying to delay the inevitable. The words didn't comfort me. The idea of dragging this through court, of being forced to relive everything again, was enough to make my stomach churn. But I knew I couldn't back down now. Not after everything I'd been through. I'm not backing down, I said, my voice firm. We fight this all the way. My lawyer nodded. Good. We'll move forward, then. But expect her to make things messy. I spent the next few days preparing myself for what was coming. I had to prepare for Lena's fight, for the emotional games she would play in court. She'd already tried to manipulate me once. But this time, I wouldn't let her win. I spent my nights going over the details again, making sure I had every email, every text, every transaction that would prove my case. I couldn't let her drag me back into the past. I had to stay focused on what was next. When the day finally came, when we went to court and sat across from her and her lawyer, the coldness in her eyes hit me like a physical blow. She was different now. Distant, calculating, as though she were just playing a part. I almost didn't recognize her. I wasn't scared. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. And that was all the power I needed. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. Maybe it was the polished wood, the sterile air of legal proceedings, or the way the whole situation seemed to strip away any semblance of personal connection. It felt like a place meant for arguments, for power dynamics, not for real people with real emotions. But even here, with all the coldness and formality, it was impossible to ignore the fact that this was the final showdown. This was where it would all come to a head. Lena sat across from me, her eyes darting between her lawyer and the judge, her lips pressed tight, the same false composure she'd worn so many times before. She was playing the part, pretending like she was the victim, pretending that I was the one who had betrayed her. But I knew better. I knew what was real. It didn't take long for the proceedings to begin. The opposing lawyer, a man with a well-tailored suit and an air of self-assurance, stood up first. He was good at what he did. Too good. But I wasn't intimidated. I had everything I needed. I had the truth. Your Honor, he began, looking at the judge with a practiced smile. We're here today because Mr. Turner has taken advantage of my client's emotional distress. She was coerced into signing legal documents she didn't fully understand under duress. Mr. Turner manipulated her in a moment of vulnerability. I couldn't help but scoff quietly. Manipulated? It was almost laughable. I had spent years trusting her, caring for her, and this is what I got in return? A cheap attempt to play the victim when she was the one who had been deceiving me all along. I glanced at Lena. She sat with her arms folded, her face carefully neutral, but I could see the flicker of guilt in her eyes when she noticed my gaze. She couldn't hide from me. Not anymore. Her lawyer continued to spin his story, painting me as the villain, using my own words against me, twisting everything into something unrecognizable. I could see where this was going. It wasn't about the facts anymore. It was about playing the game. But I wasn't going to play by her rules. When it was my turn, I stood up, trying to keep my hands from shaking. I wasn't afraid of Lena anymore, but I was afraid of what she could do with her lies. Afraid of how easily she could twist the truth to make herself look like the one who'd been wronged. Your Honor, I began, keeping my voice steady. I'm not here to attack my ex-girlfriend. I'm not here to punish her. I'm here because I've been taken advantage of for too long. I've been lied to, manipulated, and used for my resources. And I won't stand by and let that happen anymore. I felt the eyes of the courtroom on me. Lena's lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I could hear Lena's breath catch beside me, and I knew she hadn't expected me to come out swinging like this. She wasn't the only one who knew how to play the game. I've spent months uncovering the truth, Your Honor, I continued. Lena knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't a victim of emotional distress. She was calculating, methodical, and cold. The only reason she's here today is because she's trying to cover up her betrayal. She's trying to rewrite the narrative. But the truth is right here, in front of you. I turned and motioned to the stack of evidence I'd prepared, the emails, the bank statements, the screenshots of her conversations with Carter. Each one was a nail in her coffin, each one a reminder of how far she was willing to go to keep her lies intact. I have everything I need to prove that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Lena knew exactly what she was doing. She was using me to fund her affair with Carter, draining our joint accounts to support his business venture. I have the evidence right here. I handed over the documents, my heart pounding in my chest as the judge took them in. There was no going back now. I had laid everything bare. Lena's lawyer tried to interject, but I held up a hand. Let's not pretend this is about emotional distress, I said, my voice firm. This is about someone trying to avoid the consequences of their actions. And I won't let that happen. Not on my watch. I could feel the weight of the room shift. It wasn't just the evidence anymore. It was my confidence, my certainty. I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story and make me the villain. The judge looked at both of us before speaking. I've reviewed all the evidence. I'll need some time to consider the details of this case. I suggest you both take a moment to reflect on what's at stake here. This is a serious matter. I nodded and sat back down, the weight of everything hanging in the air. But this time, I didn't feel the familiar tug of guilt, the self-doubt I used to feel when I doubted my choices. I knew what I had to do. I knew I was doing the right thing. Lena didn't look at me once during the rest of the session. Her face was pale, her body stiff. I could see the walls she was putting up, the walls she had built around herself to keep me out. But it was too late for that. After the judge adjourned the session, I left the courtroom without saying another word. Lena's lawyer called after me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The next few days felt like a fog. After the hearing, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victorious, either. I felt unsettled. It was hard to explain. Part of me had hoped that once everything was out in the open, once I laid all the cards on the table, I'd feel some sort of closure, some deep breath I could finally take. But instead, I was still stuck in the limbo of what had come before. I didn't let myself think too much. Instead, I focused on what came next. I had the mentorship opportunity waiting for me abroad, a chance to rebuild and refocus my life. But even as I stared at the confirmation email from the program, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had spent so much time trying to hold everything together, trying to make sure others were taken care of, that I'd neglected myself. It was like I had been living in a fog, drifting from one day to the next, hoping things would get better. Now I was awake. I was finally aware of everything I had been ignoring. The days before I left for the program passed in a blur. I cleaned out the rest of my things at the cottage, handing over the keys to the lawyer who would handle the final details. It was strange to walk out of that house for the last time. The place that had once been our home felt like nothing more than a shell now. I had put so much of myself into it, trying to make everything perfect, trying to make her happy. But now, there was no more trying. I wasn't trying to make anyone happy except myself. I made a list, things I needed to do, things I needed to sort out before leaving. It felt like a mental reset, a checklist for a life I was finally ready to live on my own terms. I called Gwen, my sister, to ask her if she could help with some of the final packing, and she was there without hesitation. When she arrived, she could see it in my face. The exhaustion, the way I was running on empty. "Are you sure about this?" she asked softly as we packed up my things. "Leaving everything behind. It's a big change, Caleb." "I don't have a choice anymore," I said, meeting her gaze. "This isn't about the house, or Lena, or anything from the past. It's about me." Finally, for the first time in a long time. She nodded, understanding, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "I just want you to be happy. I know it's been hard." I smiled, though it didn't feel like a real smile. "I'll figure it out. I have to." When everything was packed up and ready to go, I stood there, looking around the empty space that used to be home. It was bittersweet, but in a strange way, it felt freeing. I wasn't bound to it anymore. It wasn't mine to keep. The day I left was the hardest day yet. Gwen came with me to the airport, helping me check in, making sure I didn't forget anything. It wasn't a tearful goodbye. There wasn't time for that. But I knew things would change, and I was ready for it. Ready to be somewhere new, to start fresh, and to leave behind everything that had dragged me down. As I passed through security, I paused, one last time, to glance back at Gwen. She was smiling at me, her eyes full of encouragement. "You got this, Caleb," she said, her voice warm. "Go and find yourself again. I'll be here, rooting for you." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, before walking down the corridor toward my gate. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running on empty. I was just free. I could think. I could breathe. I could make decisions without feeling like I was under someone else's control. The mentorship program was everything I'd hoped for. It was a chance to challenge myself, to push myself in ways I'd never done before. I threw myself into my work, into the experience, with the hunger of someone who was finally reclaiming themselves. Every day was a new step. Every day, I felt like I was shedding a little more of the old Caleb, the one who had spent so long giving and giving to people who never saw him. The one who thought love and sacrifice meant giving away every piece of himself until there was nothing left. But now, I was rebuilding, reclaiming who I was. And with every new project, every new skill I picked up, I realized something important. I wasn't just moving on. I was moving up. A few weeks in, I got a call from my lawyer back home. I'd been expecting it. The legal battle had been long and drawn out, but it had finally come to an end. Lena had lost. She hadn't been able to pull off the manipulation she was hoping for, and the case had been dismissed. I wasn't happy. I wasn't relieved. But in some ways, it was the last chapter. The final act of closure. The final step in walking away. The lawyer told me I was free. The house was officially mine. The business was mine. Lena's claim was dismissed. And with that, everything was done. I didn't feel like celebrating. I didn't feel like calling anyone. I just wanted to sit with the feeling of being free. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I had needed it. How much I had needed to prove to myself that I could be something, someone, without depending on anyone else's approval. I went for a walk that evening, the cool air brushing against my face as I walked through the city. The lights were bright, the streets bustling, but I didn't feel lost. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I knew exactly where I was going. I was finally free. And that, I realized, was the only thing I had ever needed.